Sigma presents Business to Government in conversation with member of the European Parliament Agius Saliba. In this episode, MEP Saliba highlights why the EU must place digital policy at the center of its agenda.
Thank you very much,
Thanks
Dr. Agius Saliba, for coming to visit us in our offices today.
It's my pleasure.
To start this interview today, could you talk us through your role within the EU?
So basically, I am a member of the European Parliament, and I have been a member of the European Parliament for the past 6 years. This is my second mandate. And apart from being head of delegation for the Maltese Socialist delegation in the European Parliament, I am also vice president within the second largest political group in Parliament, the Socialists and Democrats, coordinating all the digital work going on, basically coordinating the work going on in 7 different committees in the European Parliament and coordinating the work of around 45 MEPs who sit in these committees and who take up files having digital elements. So basically, that is my role, apart from also being responsible for communications and digital strategy in the group.
Digital strategy today is a very complex area. Could you talk us through the changes that you're seeing today?
So basically, today the digital ecosystem has become the new public utilities of our time. Until 10 years ago, when you mentioned public utilities, you would go directly to water, electricity. But today, digital infrastructure from platforms, but also to the infrastructure, which is the digital data stack from cloud infrastructure, these have become so important that if there is a glitch, and we have seen during the past months when there were even minor glitches, we ended up with a situation that public infrastructure was totally halted. We saw what happened in airports, delays. Then this was just a small bug in our infrastructure. So basically, what we are trying to do within the current geopolitical climate that we are living in right now, what we are trying to push forward is to have more resilience when it comes to this digital ecosystem. Why? Because in Europe, we believe that we are too reliant on infrastructure, digital infrastructure, from platforms to cloud to advertising. We are too reliant on other continents. So in Europe, we have the best app developers. But what is the problem? We are not able to scale up. If you mention the top platforms that we are using on a daily basis, from Meta to X to TikTok, these are the most popular platforms that are being used on a daily basis, not only by youths, but by populations in general, which are also having an influence, a direct influence on our democracies.
Absolutely,
on elections.
because most of these platforms you're mentioning are US-based.
US or China-based.
Absolutely.
So it's really important for us, and this is the biggest push that we will be seeing during this legislature, and this is what we are fighting against. So during the past mandate, we were super active when it came to legislation. I was the rapporteur on the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act when we had the own legislative initiative in Parliament, which basically are the two largest pieces of tech legislation, digital legislation, which are basically controlling and overseeing that ultimately Europe can take a little bit back the lead from these big tech giants established outside the continent when it comes to disinformation, misinformation, when it comes to the use of algorithms, when it comes to dark patterns, when it comes also to some basic elements on advertising. So, and also the DMA dealing with conglomerates and basically the power that very large online platforms have on our societies and the added responsibility that we wanted to give them. So during the last term, we were focused on negotiating this legislation. AI Act, DSA, DMA, these are fundamental and are a first, not only for Europe, but a first globally. Now it's crunch time when it comes to enforcement, but we cannot stick only to enforcement during these 5 years. We have to look beyond. And looking beyond means being more resilient when it comes also to infrastructure. I can give a number of examples. For example, when it comes to cloud, we are totally reliant, not only the private sector, but also the public sector.
Absolutely.
They are totally reliant on cloud, which is established outside of Europe. 85% of the cloud infrastructure that we are using as Europeans is established outside of our continent. Now, when we are dealing with cloud today, that is the basic.
It's the backbone, really.
That's the backbone of the digital stack. So it's really important, at least, to have European infrastructure which is based on our values, which is based on our legislation. When it comes to advertising, online advertising, which is, now we're speaking about the business model. It's the money behind these big tech giants, behind the platforms, behind the ecosystem. Targeted advertising and online advertising. Again, online advertising is concentrated in the hands of 3 US big tech giants: Amazon, Google, and Meta.
So Europe is missing out.
No, we're missing out largely when it comes to the digital data stack and resilience and digital sovereignty. So what are we pushing forward? Basically, we are pushing forward the idea to create an EU digital sovereignty fund, which can, because we know that we have the talent, and the right talent is in Europe. But what we are missing out is on channeling the funding, on helping out our industries, but also our micro initiatives. And we have a lot of good initiatives going on, but we are missing out when it comes to scaling up. So when our competitors are seeing good initiatives going on in Europe, they are buying them out. So it's really important for us to invest more, and it's useless to continue speaking about resilience only when it comes to defense, when it comes to military, when it comes to electricity, public infrastructure, and then we totally ignore resilience when it comes to digital.
What do you think, in your opinion, is the reason that Europe invests into our competitors when they're not European-based?
Because we have no alternatives. That's the biggest issue. And the easy way out is to invest abroad. So we have to be also ambitious now when it comes to, if we are missing on talent, if we are missing on expertise, I would tell you, Leah, okay, there are no alternatives and we cannot scale up, we cannot build up our infrastructure, but we have the right talent in Europe. The issue is investment and channeling the right investment and helping out. We are missing out even when it comes to the basic infrastructure, microchips, semiconductors. We ended up during the pandemic, and the pandemic was a wake-up call for all of us, totally reliant and waiting for months for this vital component, not only for computers, hardware, but it's also a basic utility, basic infrastructure for appliances, for cars. Even there, we are still reliant, and we ended up with a situation where our reliance was growing year in, year out on other continents, on Japan, on China, on the US.
What are your comments about microchips and the fact that it sort of became a political battle between the US and China? You mentioned the pandemic.
Sliced between them.
Absolutely.
And that's the biggest issue that we have. And when you are speaking of the semiconductor industry, you cannot tackle the issue only from the issue of availability. It's also an issue of security. So it's really important for us. We had the CHIPS Act, which ultimately was the first initiative, tangible initiative being taken by our continent when it comes to helping out to be reliant in a small but an important part of our digital independence. Now we are moving on to the second phase. We are negotiating as we speak the own initiative when it comes to the CHIPS Act version number 2. So we can help out more, and we have seen Because when you channel the right investment, you see positive results. And in a couple of years' time, we have already started seeing a lot of investments and less. We are becoming more resilient when it comes to chips, but we are still not there. We have also seen a big investment, which, if I'm not mistaken, was unveiled last week by the biggest manufacturer of semiconductors in Malta, who is also expanding, who also benefited from the CHIPS Act, from the right funding. So it's really important now to be ambitious also in our sectors, from advertising to cloud to platforms, creating alternatives, so that our citizens ultimately can have a choice. Because today, our companies, our citizens don't have a choice. Their only choice is continue to rely on these big tech oligarchs outside of our union who have an ecosystem which is not based on our values. And one of the basic elements in our values is creating a safe ecosystem, free from misinformation, free from disinformation, which has a high level of consumer protection and which protects European industries.
You mentioned earlier geopolitics. I'd like to refer to the turbulence that we're seeing now. What impact would that have on digital policy and everything you're speaking about today if it deteriorates?
It's a huge impact. Because again, when a couple of months ago, after the inauguration of the Trump presidency, we have seen President Trump with the showing those posters, those graphs, where he was saying that the US is importing more than exporting to Europe. He was leaving out totally the export of services that the US is targeting directly our continent. And these are all digital services. So again, when you are, and I am not going to say partially, we are totally reliant. When we are totally reliant on these platforms. So let me give a very concrete and precise example. X. There is a lot of criticism right now doing the rounds in Europe, also in Malta, about X, about the issue of how they are not tackling disinformation, misinformation, far-right narrative, doing the rounds on a platform which is owned directly by one of the biggest collaborators of Trump. And now I don't want to be political, but there are a lot of EU citizens who want to find an alternative. The only alternative for X is Blue Sky. But obviously the numbers on Blue Sky and X are totally different.
Yet. It hasn't picked up.
But still, the infrastructure on Blue Sky, as it stands today, is miles away from X. So European citizens don't have an alternative for a platform which is established in Europe, which is based on European values, which has a system which fights misinformation, upon which these platforms take responsibility also of misinformation, disinformation, where there is transparency about the algorithms and data sets that are being used. So there are no alternatives at all. And we are now in a situation where obviously the US has an upper hand when it comes to digital, and we are totally reliant. So if they want to block and basically protect their companies, big tech, and we have seen the appeals from Mark Zuckerberg before the inauguration of the Trump presidency, who was pleading to President Trump to shield Meta from the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and the AI Act. We have seen Vice President J.D. Vance coming to the Munich conference and targeting directly our legislation. But ultimately, this is what we are always pushing forward, the narrative that we are pushing forward in the European Parliament and in our circles. If you want to target EU consumers, if you want to target directly EU users, you have to abide by our rules. Be it you are a big tech, being that you are a smaller platform. If you want to target EU consumers, the EU market, you have to play by our own rules. And this is a strange thing for these platforms. Why? Because in the US, they have a model of self-regulation, codes of ethics, which are written by the same companies, and they are the enforcers of these codes of ethics. Now, this is a new reality for them. And obviously, they are not comfortable with it. Also, the investigation on and the preliminary findings that when it comes to X, they are infringing various parts of the Digital Services Act when it comes to misinformation, when it comes to access to researchers, when it comes to repositories. There are a lot of issues. And ultimately, today, we are still in a digital Wild West, where these platforms, these big companies do as they like and try to go around our legislation. So that is why we are at a crunch time. It's not the time to deregulate when it comes to our digital acquis. It's the time to enforce, and it's the time to send a message that if you don't want to play by our own rules, we are channeling the right investment to create European alternatives.
When you're speaking about disinformation, fake news, we have to also perhaps take a look at AI. Where does Europe stand with regards to ethics on AI? And
basically, the AI Act is the tool, the European tool, and right now we are working on the codes emanating from the AI Act. But ultimately, the AI Act, which is the first piece of legislation worldwide, which is defining different types of AI. I remember 3 years ago, we were at Stanford University in the US, in Silicon Valley, and they were laughing at us when we were speaking with lecturers, professors, technologists, and we were saying that we should and we must categorize different AI processes for defining them as high risk, low risk, medium risk. Because ultimately, here AI is impacting our lives on a daily basis. 3-4 years ago, when we spoke about AI, the concept was very distant to our citizens, to users. When ChatGPT came into action, our citizens started to realize the implications and the repercussions that AI can have on our daily lives, from the generation of content, which is very difficult, and it will become more difficult if not labeled, to understand if that particular content is AI generated or not. Going also to AI processes and how they are affecting places of work. Right now, I am working on as a negotiator of Parliament on the AI at workplaces. So this is a next step to the AI Act to see and to secure that the concept that workers are not robots. So it's really important to continue to expand on AI, because ultimately AI per se is a tool that can help our communities, that can help citizens, but at the same time, there are a lot of repercussions which can eat away some of the most fundamental rights that our citizens take for granted.
I mean, you spoke to us about all the committees that are related to digital policy. Can we go back to the advertising and the digital policy on that? In your opinion, how long do you think it will take for us to see the results of the changes you are trying to implement?
So we already started implementing some changes when it comes to targeted advertising for minors. So here we are speaking about the most vulnerable components of our community. So there, under the Digital Services Act, we have already implemented, and right now we are enforcing, and it's already there, enforcing the use of targeted advertising for minors. There are a lot of discussions going on to try to restrict also targeted advertising, not only for minors, but for users and citizens in general. But still, that takes time. We don't have the legislation at hand to deal with those situations. But at the same time, I believe that, again, if we don't tackle directly the issue of advertising, this is the business model of all these platforms. So if you don't tackle the very business model of these platforms to be able not to kill the platforms, but to take some control. So if you don't tackle advertising and targeted advertising, it will be very problematic for us to take back control on our democracies. Why am I saying taking back control on our democracies? Because until a couple of months ago, we have seen directly, maybe until a couple of years ago, it was sci-fi ideas that these platforms can have a direct result on our democracies. 4 months ago, we had the presidential elections in Romania. The process is still going on. We had the first round of the presidential elections 4 to 5 months ago. A personality, a far-right personality, who was who no one knew in Romania, no one knew that he existed, by using TikTok as a platform. And there again, when it comes to TikTok, you cannot do advertising on that particular platform. But algorithms worked in a way that they pushed forward the material, the content of this particular candidate, and from a no one in Romania, he ended up winning the first round of presidential elections in Romania, only on one platform. And this is not a political comment that I am making. The Constitutional Court in Romania annulled the first round of presidential elections because of how algorithms were being used on this particular platform. So these are the challenges that we are facing.
So in a way, you're saying a very popular influencer won the elections. That's what you're saying.
That's it.
Which is,
and the elections had to be cancelled and postponed for a number of weeks so that they were sure that these interferences, and here we are speaking also about foreign interference, in the most democratic exercises that we are doing in our member states. So that is why we always speak about the idea of resilience, because military attacks today are not only happening with traditional ammunition. They can easily happen also by using AI, using platforms, using algorithms that help or hide away content from citizens and users. And that is why we need strong European legislation to control the ecosystem, to push forward legislation which is based on our values.
Thank you for answering that. Sigma is a B2B platform, mostly. I'd like you to comment on the impact that your digital policy changes will make on corporates, and also how can corporates globally keep informed about the changes in Europe?
So basically all the legislation, the majority of legislation that I was speaking about when it comes to misinformation, when it comes to resilience, it's all business to consumer. So the majority of the problems are not B2B, they are more B2C. But again, I think that when it comes to, and Sigma, although today it's international, but it's also one of the best examples that we have on a European scale that emanated also from a European member state. So there was a big scale up, and now it is international. And this is what we want to see in Europe. We want to see European leaders, we want to see European initiatives scaling up, such as Sigma, to be European flag bearers internationally. So first of all, I think it's really important to maintain this line of communication with the business community and with businesses such as Sigma about all the developments that are taking place. But I think that the initiatives that I am and we are pushing forward and that we have spoken about today are not targeting business such as Sigma. It's more of an issue about creating the right environment also for Sigma and your users, especially in the European continent, to create more trust. Because ultimately, when you have a safe digital ecosystem, there is more trust from users, consumers, and citizens in the system, and they can use the system more freely and more openly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time
It was a
today.
pleasure.
Thank you.